Good morning, everyone. I hope that you've had a really great weekend. Today is our second week of exploring Brene Brown's 4 myths of vulnerability. So last week we looked at the first myth, which is that vulnerability is weakness. So you can go back and have a look at that video. We actually discovered that in fact vulnerability is courage and strength. So this week is myth number 2, which is that you can opt out of vulnerability. This is an interesting thing because vulnerability is one of the hardest things that we do in our life, and yet it's something that we do every single day. So Brene's research found the definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So if we think about that definition and this myth that you can opt out of vulnerability, the fact is if you're alive, you're being vulnerable. So we cannot stop ourselves from living a life that's uncertain, that has risk involved, and that has the possibility of exposing us emotionally. And so we can't actually opt out of vulnerability. We are vulnerable every single day of our life because of the fact that there's uncertainty and risk in our world. And so Brene says in her book, Daring Greatly, she says, when we pretend that we can avoid vulnerability, we engage in behaviours that are often inconsistent with who we want to be. Experiencing vulnerability isn't a choice. The only choice we have is how we're going to respond when we are confronted with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So you can't opt out of vulnerability. We can't opt out of vulnerability. We're all having a sense of being vulnerable and sharing our vulnerability every single day by just being alive. But the question is, how will you respond when you feel uncertain, when you feel that risk, and when you feel like you're emotionally exposed? That's the question. So I'm going to leave that with you today. Have a think about those times when you feel really vulnerable, those times when you are sharing vulnerably, when you are feeling like, I can't handle this uncertainty and risk, and right now I feel really emotionally exposed. Ask yourself, what is it that you need during those times? How is it that you need to be cared for? How can you care for yourself when you're feeling that sense of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? So I'm going to leave that with you today, and I look forward to talking to you next week for myth number 3. Bye.